The doctor signed my discharge papers. As she left, the nurse squeezed my hand, whispering, "Be strong." I stared at my reflection in the ER restroom mirror. The blood was cleaned away, but the bruises remained vivid against my skin. 3 hours ago, my stepmother, our company's CFO, did this to me in an elevator's blind spot. Tomorrow morning, I'll walk into the boardroom as if nothing happened, but my presentation will be the end of her reign. My name is Rhea Collins. I am 32 years old. The fluorescent lights of the Stone Lake Hospital emergency room hummed a flat, monotonous tune that vibrated deep in my bones. It was a sound of quiet crisis, a constant that underpinned the staccato beeps of a distant heart monitor and the rustle of a nurse's scrubs. The air was thick with the clean, sharp scent of antiseptic, a chemical smell that tried and failed to mask the underlying notes of fear and human frailty. It was an odor I knew I would never forget. The perfume of the night my carefully constructed world had been physically shattered. I sat on the edge of a gurney, the paper sheet crinkling beneath me, a thin barrier against the cold vinyl. Everything in this space was designed for function over comfort, a place of stark realities where sentiment had no currency. The walls were a sterile white, the floor a polished linoleum that reflected the unforgiving overhead lights. It was a place where stories began and ended, and tonight it was the staging ground for mine. With a borrowed ballpoint pen that felt flimsy and cheap in my trembling hand, I signed the discharge forms on the clipboard the nurse had handed me. My signature, usually a confident, fluid script, came out jagged and tight. Rhea Collins. The name looked foreign, like that of a stranger who had endured something I had only witnessed. I carefully, deliberately, pulled the collar of my silk blouse higher, ensuring the fabric completely covered the blossoming, angry bruise over my collarbone. It was a small, practiced gesture of concealment, one I had perfected over the years in a different kind of war zone. The pain was a dull, persistent throb, a physical reminder of the impact, but I walled it off, compartmentalizing it into a box labeled Data Point. The nurse, a woman with kind, tired eyes and a name tag that read Linda, watched me with a knowing sympathy that was both comforting and unnerving. She had seen this story before, in countless variations. "You should take pictures," she'd said earlier, her voice low and steady as she applied a cold pack to my jaw. "For your own records, every angle, with the timestamp on." I had simply nodded, my throat too tight to form words. She didn't ask who did it. She didn't need to. The answer was in the shame I was trying to hide, in the way I flinched when the doctor gently palpated my ribs. She knew it was someone I was supposed to trust. Inside the stark, echoing confines of the ER restroom, I followed her advice with the cold precision of a crime scene photographer. I locked the door, the click of the bolt loud in the sudden silence, leaning against the cold tile wall. I took a deep, steadying breath, ignoring the sharp protest from my ribs. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger's. My face was pale, my eyes wide and dark, pupils dilated from adrenaline. The blood had been wiped away, but a faint reddish smear remained near my hairline where a strand of hair had stuck. The bruise on my jaw was already turning a dark, mottled purple, a hideous orchid blooming on my skin. I raised my phone, the sleek, impersonal glass and metal, a stark contrast to the human damage it was about to document. The flash was brutal, washing out my skin and highlighting the topography of the injury in stark relief. Click, I photographed my jaw from the left, then the right. Click, click, I pulled my collar down, my fingers clumsy. The violent, fingerprint-sized contusions on my collarbone were stark against the pale skin. Click, I turned, arching my back to capture the deep, aching bruise on my ribs, where the corner of her briefcase had dug into me. For each photo, I made sure the phone's native camera app was embedding the full EXIF data, GPS coordinates of Stone Lake Hospital, date, and a timestamp down to the second. Evidence. Clean, irrefutable, digital evidence. Each flash of the camera was a hammer blow, forging my pain into something hard and useful. As I was pocketing my phone, it buzzed with an incoming message. The name on the screen made my stomach clench into a tight, cold knot. Mara Kincaid, my stepmother, the CFO, my assailant. The text was short, brutally dismissive, and so perfectly in character. Don't turn a private matter into a spectacle. My thumb hovered over the screen. A spectacle. That's what this was to her. Not a violent assault, but an inconvenient bit of drama that might tarnish her pristine public image. A private matter, as if her fists on my body were a family squabble to be smoothed over before breakfast. I didn't feel rage. That would come later. Perhaps, in its place was a chilling, clarifying calm. This text was not a threat. It was a mistake. It was an admission, a confirmation of the event, and a pathetic attempt at control. I took a screenshot, the sound of the digital shutter unnaturally loud in the small room. I saved the image to a specific folder on my phone, then immediately uploaded a copy. Another piece of evidence, time-stamped and preserved. Back in the sterile quiet of the waiting area, I logged into my encrypted cloud drive. The two-factor authentication code arrived on my phone, and I typed it in with steady fingers. I navigated to a folder hidden 3 layers deep, a directory with a randomly generated alphanumeric name. Inside it was a single, password-protected archive file named Failsafe. This was my life's work, my insurance policy, the digital ghost of years spent in Mara's shadow. It contained every discrepancy I had ever found, every suspiciously rounded number in a quarterly report, every vendor contract that smelled of cronyism, every email with language that was just slightly too suggestive of a backroom deal. I had started it 2 years after she married my father. When I realized that her ambition had no moral compass, it was a meticulously organized collection of data, cross-referenced and annotated. The assault, the photographs, the text message, they weren't the beginning of my case against her. They were the final, ugly, violent punctuation mark. I added the new files, the password, a complex string of characters I had long ago committed to muscle memory. The progress bar filled, the upload completed, and the archive synced across 3 different secure servers on 2 continents. The failsafe was updated, the weapon was loaded. My next step was to verify the stage. I looked up the number for Stonehaven Towers building management. My voice, when I spoke to the night manager, was calm and professional. The voice of Rhea Collins, Senior Risk Strategist for Novacrest Holdings. Hi, this is Rhea Collins from Novacrest on the 48th floor. I'm just doing a quick audit follow-up. Could you possibly confirm the maintenance schedule for the elevator bank C cameras today? Specifically, elevator 17. I could hear him typing. There was a pause. Okay, Ms. Collins, let's see. Elevator 17. Yes, we had a scheduled firmware update. The camera feed was offline for routine maintenance from 7:41 p.m. to 7:52 p.m. tonight. 11 minutes. My heart didn't race. Instead, it settled into a slow, heavy, determined beat. 11 minutes. She had been so precise, so confident in her planning. She knew the schedule. She had engineered the blind spot. Thank you, I said, my voice betraying nothing. That's all I need. I hung up and wrote the times down in a new note on my phone, the numbers glowing on the screen, 1941 to 1952. The window of opportunity, the scene of the crime. With that confirmation, I initiated the next logical step. Using my corporate credentials, I logged into the Stonehaven Tower security portal, a privilege afforded to my role in risk management. The interface was clunky, utilitarian, but I knew my way around it. I pulled the access logs for Elevator Bank C for the relevant time frame. The data loaded, a sterile list of timestamps and employee ID numbers. There it was, in black and white. 1942. Mara Kincaid. ID 7001. Accessed elevator 17, 48th floor. 1943. Rhea Collins. ID 7854. Accessed elevator 17, 48th floor. The log was clean. No one else entered. No one else exited on any other floor until the lobby. We were alone. The maintenance window covered the entire duration of the ride down. She had trapped me in a black box of her own making. I exported the log as a PDF and a raw CSV file, the downloads completing in seconds. I uploaded them both immediately to the fail-safe archive. The digital breadcrumbs were now forming a clear, damning trail leading directly to her. I opened a separate, clean note on my phone. A new file for a new purpose, the plan for the morning. I typed out a single, simple sentence, a mantra for the hours to come. Tomorrow. Silence in the lobby. Speak in the boardroom. It was a reminder of the discipline required. There would be no visible emotion, no hint of the night's trauma. In the elevator, in the hallways, at my desk. I would be the same quiet, efficient Rhea I had always been. My silence would be her comfort, her reassurance that her intimidation had worked. She would walk into that boardroom expecting me to be cowed, broken, and silent. She would be expecting a report on quarterly risk variances. She would not be expecting the truth. The boardroom, with its panoramic windows and polished mahogany table, would be my stage. The presentation screen would be my weapon. My voice would be the trigger. Finally, I stood up to leave. The pain in my ribs was a sharp, insistent reminder with every breath. In the car, under the dim glow of the dome light, I opened the small first aid kit I kept in the glove compartment. I took out a roll of medical tape and a sterile gauze pad. Carefully, methodically, I pressed the pad over the worst of the bruises on my collarbone and secured it with the tape. It wasn't about hiding the injury anymore. It was about controlling it. It was a physical boundary, a way to contain the chaotic pain and keep it from showing on my face. I leaned my head back against the seat and began the breathing exercises my first therapist had taught me years ago. When the pressure of living in Mara's world first started to feel suffocating. In for 4 counts, hold for 7, out for 8. I felt the frantic energy in my chest begin to subside, replaced by a cold, focused clarity. I breathed in the pain, the humiliation, the shock. And with every slow, controlled exhale, I converted it. I transformed the raw, chaotic energy of trauma into the clean, sharp lines of a plan. The pain was no longer just a wound. It was a compass needle, and it was pointing directly at her. My father remarried on a crisp autumn afternoon 12 years ago. The woman he chose was Mara Kincaid. She wasn't so much a person as she was a perfectly executed concept. She had a smile engineered for press releases and a network of contacts so vast and valuable, it felt like a living stock ticker scrolling behind her eyes. I was 20, home from college for the wedding, and I watched her glide through the reception at the Graybridge Country Club, her hand resting on my father's arm with a proprietary grace. She was a master of the soft touch and the hard calculation. She laughed at the right jokes, her voice a cultivated melody, and remembered the names of everyone from the junior partners to the catering staff. She was, even then, a study in strategic charm. I remember thinking that she didn't marry my father. She acquired him. He was the friendly, respected CEO of Novacrest Holdings, and she was the brilliant, ambitious VP from a rival firm. Their union wasn't a romance. It was a merger. Graybridge, the manicured, affluent town where Novacrest had its headquarters, was the perfect backdrop for their nuptials. It was where deals were signed on golf courses and power was consolidated over cocktails. Mara wasn't just joining a family. She was taking over a kingdom. The true consolidation of her power began 2 years later when my father's health began to fail. It started subtly, a tremor in his hand, a forgotten word, a weariness that sleep couldn't fix. The diagnosis of early-onset Parkinson's was a slow-motion earthquake that buckled the foundations of our lives. As he progressively withdrew from the company he had built, Mara stepped in, not with the gentle support of a wife, but with the swift, decisive action of a successor. She leveraged his trust and the board's sympathy, moving from her senior role to his. Within 18 months, she was the chief financial officer of Novacrest Holdings, the iron hand guiding the company's treasury. It was during this period that I graduated and at my father's gentle urging, joined the company. Mara placed me herself, not in a management training program, not in a department where I could learn the business holistically, but in a quiet corner of the finance department as a junior data analyst. It was a move of brilliant, subtle strategy. She had brought me under her roof and under her authority, positioning me where she could watch me, a potential threat neutralized and contained. Our home, a sprawling colonial my parents had bought 25 years prior, was transformed under her reign. Every surface was polished, every room staged as if for a magazine shoot. The most telling change was the photographs. Mara curated our family's history with the ruthless eye of a museum director. Gone were the candid, chaotic pictures of my childhood with my mother. In their place appeared a series of professionally shot portraits, all framed in severe, minimalist black frames. The photos depicted a flawless, blended family. Mara, radiant and in control. My father, looking distinguished but slightly faded. And me, positioned just so, smiling a smile that never quite reached my eyes. Every photograph was a lie, a carefully constructed narrative of harmony. There were no cracks in Mara's frames. Nothing was ever out of place. It was Mara who first called me practical. It sounded like a compliment, and she delivered it with her signature PR smile. "Ria is so wonderfully practical," she would say to her friends or to colleagues at company functions, but I understood the subtext. Practical was the opposite of aspirational. Practical things were useful but not beautiful. A dishwasher is practical. A spreadsheet is practical. I was the sturdy, reliable pair of shoes, not the designer handbag on display. I was not cover-worthy. I was the one who made sure my father's prescriptions were filled, who liaised with his doctors, who managed the household logistics while she managed the corporate empire. My practicality was my function, and it defined my place in her world. Useful, necessary, but ultimately uninteresting, and certainly not a threat to her dominance. My first real taste of her corporate sabotage was 3 years into my career. I had worked tirelessly, distinguishing myself as a sharp and meticulous analyst. A senior analyst position opened up on a high-profile project team, a clear stepping stone. My direct manager recommended me. My performance reviews were perfect. It was a foregone conclusion. A week before the announcement, I was called into a meeting with HR and the department head. The news was delivered in a cloud of corporate jargon. While my work was excellent, they had decided to go with another candidate who was a better cultural fit. The phrase hung in the air, meaningless and absolute. It was a verdict without evidence, a closed door with no key. Later that day, I saw Mara in the hallway. She placed a cool hand on my arm. "I heard," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "Don't worry, darling. Another opportunity will come along. This just wasn't the right one for you." She had done it, of course. A quiet word in the right ear, a suggestion that I was perhaps too rigid, too practical for such a dynamic team. She had blocked me not because I was incompetent, but because I was becoming competent enough to be noticed. The whispers about Mara started long before I had any proof. They were quiet, cautious rumors exchanged in the break room or over after-work drinks. Stories of vendors who were awarded lucrative contracts despite being more expensive and less qualified than their competitors. Murmurs about backyard LLCs, shell companies that seemed to spring from nowhere and land on the preferred supplier list. The talk was always vague, never directly implicating her, but her name hovered over it all like a shadow. She was the one who signed the checks, the one who controlled the budget with an iron fist. It was said she was building her own network within the company, a web of loyalty and obligation funded by Novacrest's coffers. She was accumulating power, not just through her title, but through a hidden economy of favors and kickbacks. I had a choice. I could confront the rumors, make a scene, and be dismissed as a disgruntled, emotional stepdaughter, or I could do something else. I chose the latter. I buried my anger. I packed it down deep inside me, transforming its heat into fuel. I stopped seeing my job as a career and started seeing it as an education. I threw myself into my work with a singular, obsessive focus. I didn't just analyze data. I learned to read it, to understand its language, to see the stories hidden within the numbers. I taught myself forensic accounting in my spare time. I learned to trace the flow of money through complex corporate structures. Cash flow, I discovered, doesn't lie. It doesn't have an agenda. It can't be charmed or intimidated. It simply tells the truth, and I was determined to learn its grammar. The holidays were the hardest. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Each one was a command performance of family unity. The house would be filled with Mara's powerful friends, the air thick with false cheer and the scent of catered food. I would sit at the far end of the long dining table, a decorative bookend to the festivities. I was a prop in her play, a testament to her supposed grace in handling my father's situation. She would toast to family, her eyes sweeping over me with a look that was both possessive and dismissive. These moments were a constant, painful reminder of my place. I was a part of the picture, but not part of the story she was writing. I was an object, a relic of a life that had existed before her. Over time, I learned to adapt. I learned to perfect the art of being overlooked. Mara saw me as practical, unremarkable, invisible, so I became invisible. I cultivated a quiet, unassuming demeanor at work. I kept my head down, did my job flawlessly, and never drew attention to myself. I became the person no one noticed in a meeting, the analyst who was always there but never really seen. But my invisibility was not a sign of surrender. It was a strategy. It was a cloak. While she was busy being seen, being admired, being feared, I was in the background, watching, listening, and learning. While she was building her empire of lies, I was quietly gathering the stones to bring it down. She had relegated me to the shadows, never imagining that from the shadows, I could see everything. Novacrest Holdings is not a company. It is an engine. From its headquarters in the gleaming 80-story Stonehaven Tower in the heart of Northwick's financial district, it powers the invisible architecture of the modern world. We are in the business of data infrastructure services. We own, lease, and manage the physical pathways through which information travels. The fiber optic cables buried under cities, the cellular towers disguised as pine trees, the cavernous data centers that hum with the stored memory of a civilization. It is a business of immense scale and microscopic detail, a world of concrete conduits and billion-dollar contracts, where a misplaced decimal point in a service-level agreement can cost more than a suburban home. The company my father built was supposed to be a monument to connectivity and reliability. Under Mara, it had become a fortress of opacity. Her control was absolute, and its primary instrument was the vendor procurement budget. She didn't just manage it, she weaponized it. Shortly after becoming CFO, she instituted a series of sweeping reforms under the banner of strategic optimization. The centerpiece was a system of multi-layered framework agreements. On the surface, it was a model of efficiency, allowing for pre-approved vendors to be engaged quickly for ongoing projects. In reality, it was a labyrinth. A primary contract would be awarded to a major, reputable firm, but the agreement would contain clauses allowing for an extensive pre-approved list of subcontractors and sub-subcontractors. The money flowed from Novacrest to the primary vendor, then fractured, cascading down through layers of smaller entities. Each layer added complexity, diffusing responsibility and making a true end-to-end audit nearly impossible. Mara's genius was in creating a system that looked fiscally prudent from a 30,000-foot view, while at ground level, it was a swamp of hidden relationships and discretionary spending. She didn't break the rules. She rewrote them to make her actions permissible. My escape from the analyst pool came 5 years into my tenure. It wasn't a gift from Mara. It was a move she failed to block. My department head, a straight-laced veteran of the company named Arthur Vance, advocated for my promotion to senior risk strategist. He valued my practicality, my ability to see patterns in raw data that others missed. Mara likely saw the move as strategically sound. She was placing the quiet, diligent stepdaughter in a role that sounded important but was, in her mind, purely academic. Risk strategists built models and wrote policy papers. They didn't typically dig into active procurement files. It was a miscalculation on her part. She underestimated the scope of the role's permissions. As a senior risk strategist, I was granted a new level of system access. I could now view not just the financial data, but the metadata behind it. Access logs, revision histories, IP stamps on approvals. It was the digital equivalent of being handed a key to every filing cabinet in the building. The corporate theater for Nova Crest's executive class is the main boardroom on the 48th floor. It is a space designed to intimidate. 3 walls are floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a godlike view of Northwick sprawling below. The 4th wall is a seamless, high-resolution LED screen the size of a small billboard. The furniture is stark, expensive, and uncomfortable. It is a room built for pronouncements, not discussions. For years, I had only seen it from the outside. Now, presenting quarterly risk assessments, I came to understand its power. It was a panopticon where every facial expression was visible, every whisper audible, and it was the place where, on that massive, unforgiving screen, the truth could be made too big to ignore. It was the perfect stage for an execution. Mara's obfuscation was deeply embedded in the company's digital architecture, specifically the e-procurement system, dubbed Procure Flow. It was a masterpiece of deliberate inefficiency. To get a new vendor approved and paid required a chain of digital handshakes from at least 3 separate departments: the originating project team, finance, and compliance. The process was designed so that no single person ever felt fully responsible. The project manager confirmed the work was done, finance confirmed the invoice matched the purchase order, and compliance confirmed it fit within the approved vendor framework. Each was a small, seemingly innocent click. Responsibility was atomized. A single corrupt decision, like approving an unqualified vendor, was disguised as a series of routine administrative tasks performed by people who were encouraged to stay in their silos. It was a system that discouraged curiosity and rewarded clerical speed. 2 years ago, in a move celebrated by the market as a cost-saving triumph, Mara proposed a corporate restructuring. The primary target was the compliance department. She argued it was bloated, a relic of an older, less efficient business model. Her presentation was flawless, filled with charts showing headcount redundancies and workflow bottlenecks. The board approved it unanimously. The department was gutted. Seasoned investigators were replaced by junior checklist tickers. The institutional knowledge that knew which contracts to scrutinize, which vendor relationships to question, was eliminated. The watchdog had been defanged and put on a very short leash. It was one of Mara's boldest moves, clearing the field of any potential internal opposition. The largest and most complex project in Nova Crest's portfolio was Northmore Data Transit. It was a massive undertaking to lay a new network of subterranean fiber optic cable, creating a high-speed data corridor connecting the coastal cities. The contract was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a crown jewel project that Mara often cited in shareholder meetings as proof of the company's robust growth. The primary contractor was a massive, blue-chip engineering firm, beyond reproach, but the real work, the messy, expensive work of drilling, trenching, and installation, was handled by a complex web of subcontractors, all managed under one of Mara's labyrinthine framework agreements. It was deep within the payment schedules for the Northmore project that I first saw the name, Ardent Axis LLC. It appeared 6 months ago, listed as a Tier 3 subcontractor responsible for specialized geological surveying. It was a small entry, a rounding error in the context of the project's total budget. The payments were consistent, wired monthly, always just under the threshold that would require an additional layer of executive review. The name was bland, forgettable, designed to blend into the endless spreadsheets of vendor data. It was a ghost in the machine. On paper, Ardent Axis was clean. Its incorporation documents, filed in Delaware, showed it was a standalone entity. Its registered agent was a generic corporate services company. There were no names on the filings that connected back to anyone at Nova Crest. It was a perfect corporate cutout, but I had a tool the paper filings couldn't account for: the system access logs. The initial setup of Ardent Axis as a vendor in ProcureFlow had to be done by a Nova Crest employee. Digging into the system's back-end logs, I traced the creation of the vendor profile. It was created late on a Friday evening, a common time to bury administrative tasks. The crucial piece of data was the IP address of the machine that submitted the final approval. It wasn't a Nova Crest IP address from within Stonehaven Tower. It was an external IP from a residential internet service provider in a wealthy suburb of Northwick. On its own, that was unusual, but not definitive. The smoking gun came when I cross-referenced that IP address with other system logs. The same address had been used on 3 separate occasions to log into Mara's secure executive VPN portal, using her credentials. On days she was officially logged as working from home, the connection was no longer theoretical. It was a digital fingerprint, linking her private residence to the creation of this phantom vendor. I opened my private, encrypted file, the one I called Failsafe. I created a new entry. I typed the name Ardent Axis LLC, and next to it, I added the incriminating IP address and the corresponding timestamps from both the vendor creation log and Mara's VPN access records. I highlighted the entire line in red. It was no longer just a name on a list. It was a loose thread, and I knew, with the cold certainty of a mathematician solving an equation, that if I pulled on that one single thread, Mara Kincaid's entire, perfectly woven tapestry of lies would unravel. The day after the emergency room felt unnervingly normal. The morning sun sliced through my apartment blinds. The city of Northwick hummed its familiar tune, and my reflection in the mirror showed a professional woman ready for work. But beneath the crisp collar of my blouse, the medical tape was a stark, white patch, a hidden flag of last night's battle. At my desk on the 48th floor, surrounded by the quiet hum of servers and the muted clicks of keyboards, the silent investigation began. My movements were small, precise, and executed with the detached calm of a bomb disposal expert. Each click of the mouse, each keystroke, was a deliberate step through a minefield. My first act was to legitimize the information I had gathered in the frantic hours after the assault. I composed a formal email to the Stonehaven Tower building management. The subject line read, "Urgent. Systems Integrity Audit Query. Elevator Bank C." In the body, I cited a non-existent risk protocol, requesting the official maintenance logs for elevator car 17 for the previous day. It was a perfect piece of corporate camouflage. Within the hour, a PDF landed in my inbox. It was a dry technical document, listing work orders and technician IDs. I cross-referenced it with the verbal confirmation from the night manager. The details aligned perfectly. Technician ID 451, firmware update, camera feed offline from 1941 to 1952. I saved the PDF to my local drive, then uploaded it to the Failsafe archive. It was my first brick in the wall of evidence. Next, I revisited the keycard access logs I had pulled the night before. Staring at them now, on my dual monitors in the sterile light of the office, they felt colder, more damning. The data was binary and absolute. Mara Kincaid, 1942-14. Rhea Collins, 1943-01. No other entries. We were ghosts in a machine that was, for 11 calculated minutes, designed to be blind, but the doors, they still kept records. The data was pristine, but it was also vulnerable. Mara was powerful, with allies in every department, including IT. A log file could be corrupted, an entry accidentally wiped during a server reset. I needed to freeze it in place. I left my desk and walked down to a public alcove on the 30th floor, using a communal phone. I dialed the internal IT security hotline. I didn't give my name. I simply reported a potential data integrity anomaly in the physical access logs for Elevator Bank C between 1930 and 2000 yesterday. I reported seeing a flicker in the live feed monitor. It was a lie, but a plausible one. The analyst on the other end, trained to take any potential breach seriously, created a case ticket. That action triggered an automated, non-overridable preservation order on the specified data tables. The logs were now locked, immutable, and time-stamped by a system Mara couldn't touch. With the physical evidence secured, I pivoted to the financial. I ran a full vendor payment query on Ardent Axis LLC. The numbers filled my screen. A history of consistent, mid-level payments, but one transaction stood out. Right at the beginning of their engagement, it was a massive advanced mobilization fee, an upfront payment that was wildly disproportionate to the services they were supposedly providing. It was a capital injection, not a payment for services rendered. It was a classic sign of a shell company being filled with cash. I drilled down into the transaction details. The wire transfer wasn't routed to a major commercial bank in Northwick, but to a small, sleepy regional bank, Graybridge Savings and Loan, the same town where Mara and my father lived, the same town where she had married him. The connection was circumstantial, but it was another brick, fitting perfectly alongside the others. I needed to know more about the elevator. I remembered the technician who had installed our new floor's security system, a grizzled, no-nonsense engineer named Sal. I found him in the basement-level workshop, surrounded by spools of wire and diagnostic equipment. I approached him under the guise of asking about a flickering light in my office. After he gave me a simple solution, I lingered. "Hey, Sal," I said, my tone casual. "A random question. The intercoms in the new elevators, I read somewhere they have an audio buffer, in case someone gets trapped?" He grunted, not looking up from the circuit board he was soldering. "Impact triggered," he said. "The mic's always live, but it only saves a file if the system detects a hard jolt, emergency brake, someone banging on the walls. It saves a 30-second wave file of the preceding audio, sends it straight to the security server." My heart hammered against my ribs, the slam of his briefcase against my side, the thud of my back hitting the brushed steel wall. A jolt. There might be a recording. I thanked him and walked away, my mind racing. A 30-second file, a file that might contain the sound of the assault, and more importantly, her voice. My next step was clinical. I logged into the Stone Lake Hospital patient portal and sent a secure message to the ER doctor. I thanked him for his care and requested a formal medical summary for my records. I was specific. "Please provide a neutral to clinical description of the soft tissue injuries and contusions observed, with locations noted. For insurance purposes, I require that the summary contain no speculation as to the cause of the injuries." It was a carefully worded request. I didn't want a doctor's opinion. I wanted a doctor's observation. The response came 2 hours later, a PDF attachment on official hospital letterhead, clinically detailing multiple contusions consistent with blunt force trauma. Another brick, cold, hard, and impartial. Now for the riskiest move, Mara's emails. I couldn't access her inbox directly. That was illegal, but I could access them through the front door, using the key she herself had given me. As a senior risk strategist, my mandate was to protect the company from vendor fraud. I opened a new formal audit case in our system. The subject, Ardent Axis LLC. The justification, anomalous upfront payment structure and non-standard banking relationship. The audit protocol, which Mara had personally approved during her restructuring, gave me the authority to place a legal hold and create a cached archive of all internal communications related to the vendor under review. I executed the command. The system whirred silently in the background, copying every single email in the NovaCrest servers, sent or received by Mara Kincaid, that contained the words Ardent Axis. The process was automated, logged, and entirely defensible under corporate policy. I had her words, and she would never even know I had taken them. With the digital dragnet in place, I turned my attention back to the corporate structure. Using the firm's powerful LexisNexis account, I went deeper into the Delaware corporate registry. Ardent Axis was a dead end, a shell, but the documents listed a registered agent, a paralegal service. I cross-referenced the paralegal's name, She was listed as an agent for 24 other LLCs. One of them caught my eye: Vega Consulting. It was incorporated 2 years before Ardent Axis. I ran the search again, this time on Vega Consulting. The structure was more complex, layered, but buried in an amended statement of ownership from 3 years ago. I found it. The sole shareholder of Vega Consulting was not a person, it was a blind trust. My breath caught in my throat. I read the name of the trust on the screen, the sterile, black and white letters forming a word that felt like a physical blow. The Kincaid Family Trust. It was her. It was always her. Ardent Axis was a phantom, created by Vega Consulting, which was owned by a trust bearing her own family name. She was embezzling millions from my father's company and funneling it into an account that bore her own name. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. I leaned back in my chair, the view of Northwick from the 48th floor seeming distant and unreal. I had it all: the physical assault, a desperate act to silence a witness, and the sprawling financial crime that provided the motive. The two narratives were now one. I opened the fail-safe archive one last time. I created a new subfolder, naming it Board Presentation. Inside, I placed a link to every piece of evidence I had gathered: the maintenance logs, the keycard data, the doctor's report, the audio request ticket, the archived emails, the bank statements, and the trust documentation. And over this final, complete collection of her crimes, I added a single, unifying tag: elevator. It was the piece that connected everything. The private violence and the public crime were now locked together. The silent investigation was over. The war was about to begin. The architecture of a perfect trap is not complex. It is elegant in its simplicity. It requires an understanding of your target's nature, their appetites, their blind spots, their vanities. Mara's nature was ambition, alloyed with a deep-seated arrogance. She believed herself to be the smartest person in any room, and that her plans were too sophisticated to be unraveled by someone she considered merely practical. My plan was not designed to outsmart her, but to use her own self-perception as the mechanism of the trap itself. It would be a game of corporate chess, and I would move my pieces under the guise of bureaucratic diligence. My opening gambit was a formal proposal, drafted on a Wednesday morning. The title was a masterpiece of impenetrable corporate jargon: Proposal for a Proactive Security Threat Mitigation Pilot Program for Tier 3 Infrastructure Vendors. It was dense, boring, and filled with buzzwords. Buried in the third paragraph was the key detail. The pilot would begin with a single, randomly selected vendor currently engaged on the Northmore Data Transit Project. The vendor I had pre-selected, citing its specialized and sensitive role in geological surveying, was Ardent Axis, LLC. The core of the proposal was a mandatory top-to-bottom security and compliance review of this vendor, a process that would serve as a template for future reviews. It was an argument she couldn't refute. As CFO, she was publicly a hawk on security and risk. To argue against it would be to argue against her own stated principles. The proposal's addendum contained the poison pill. It was a single clause, inserted into a long, tedious section on budgetary oversight for pilot programs. The language was dry, legalistic, and designed to be skimmed over. It stated that for any pilot project where total expenditure, including initial setup fees, was projected to exceed $500,000, the vendor would be subject to an open books provision. This would grant NovaCrest, or a designated third-party auditor, full access to the vendor's detailed financial statements, transaction records, and ownership documentation. The $500,000 threshold was carefully chosen. Ardent Axis's existing payments, including the anomalous upfront fee, already totaled over $400,000. Any further engagement, even a small one, would trigger the clause. The bait to get her to swallow this hook had to appeal to her primary motivation: money. I spent a full day building a simulated profit and loss statement for the pilot program. It was a work of fiction grounded in fact, a weaponized spreadsheet. I projected that by implementing the security protocols we tested with Ardent Axis across the entire Northmore subcontractor network, we could identify and eliminate certain payment inefficiencies and redundancies. I massaged the numbers, created plausible-looking data models, and arrived at a conclusion that was both impressive and believable. The pilot, my model showed, would lead to a projected 1.8% reduction in overhead costs for the entire project in the next fiscal quarter. It was a figure just large enough to be a significant win for her, but not so large as to be unbelievable. I scheduled a 15-minute meeting with her for Friday morning. I walked into her office, a minimalist expanse of glass and chrome overlooking the city, and presented my case with the quiet deference she expected of me. I didn't sell it. I reported it. I laid out the security rationale, then moved quickly to the P&L. I pointed to the 1.8% figure on the screen. "It's a conservative estimate," I said softly, "but the models indicate a high probability of success." Her eyes, cold and assessing, scanned the numbers. She didn't care about the security protocols. She cared about the 1.8%. It was another victory she could claim as her own, another line item in her report to the board. "Get it done," she said, her tone dismissive. She pulled the digital signature pad towards her and scribbled her approval on the proposal's cover sheet without a second glance at the addendum. The trap was set. The signature was the sound of the steel jaws snapping shut. With her approval logged in the system, I executed the next move. I contacted a reputable, mid-sized independent auditing firm, one Nova Crest had never used before. I initiated a formal engagement under the Vendor Risk Refresh Program, a dormant corporate policy I had unearthed that allowed my department to periodically vet key suppliers. Because the Ardent Axis pilot was now an officially sanctioned project, bringing in auditors was a standard, defensible procedure. I wasn't investigating a crime. I was simply performing due diligence. The auditors were scheduled to begin their work on Monday. Their first official request to Ardent Axis, as stipulated by the contract Mara had just signed, would be for their complete and unabridged financial records and statement of ownership. Now I needed the stage. I sent a polite, formal request to June Mercer, the long-serving and unflappable secretary to the board of directors. I requested a 20-minute slot at the weekly executive committee meeting on Monday morning. My justification was the pilot program. The timing was critical, I argued, to secure full executive buy-in before the auditors formally engaged the vendor. She gave me the 9:00 a.m. slot, the meeting invitation that went out to the entire executive team, including Mara, had a deliberately vague and boring title. Northmore Transit, Q3 Variance Review. It sounded like a routine budget update, a statistical deep dive that Mara would likely expect me to handle with my usual dry technical precision. It would lull her into a state of complacency. She would anticipate a presentation about numbers, not a reckoning. That weekend, I didn't rest. I worked with a silent, feverish intensity. I sequestered myself in an empty office on a different floor, a place no one would think to look for me. My own data was solid, but I needed to present it with the unassailable authority of the finance department's own tools. I quietly accessed the network drive where they kept their data visualization templates. I found the model they used for the annual shareholder presentation, a powerful, sophisticated tool for illustrating complex financial flows. I poured my data into it. I plugged in the payment records from Nova Crest, the wire transfers to Graybridge Savings and Loan, the corporate filings from Delaware. The software did the rest, rendering my raw data into a clean, brutal, and simple flowchart. It showed the money leaving Nova Crest, flowing through the prime contractor, then being diverted to Ardent Axis. From there, it showed the line moving cleanly to Vega Consulting, and from Vega, it terminated in a single, clearly labeled box, the Kincaid Family Trust. On Sunday evening, I executed the final psychological play. I knew Mara often did a late-night walkthrough of the 48th floor before a Monday meeting, a way of surveying her kingdom. I left my laptop on at my desk, locked, but with the screen active. Displayed on it was a single, deliberately amateurish PowerPoint slide. It had a simple bar chart showing Ardent Axis's payment history with a note. Query: Payment schedule variance exceeds 15% norm. It was the most basic, superficial observation one could make. It was the slide of a diligent but unimaginative analyst. It was exactly the kind of work she expected from me. It was the pawn I was sacrificing. I left my desk and went to the coffee machine down the hall. From my vantage point, I saw her pause at my workstation. She looked at the screen for a long moment. A small, almost imperceptible smirk touched her lips. She saw the slide and drew the conclusion I wanted her to draw, that I had found a minor accounting irregularity and was about to bore the committee with it. She would be prepared to swat me down, to patronize me for my lack of strategic vision. She would walk into that room feeling completely, utterly in control. I went home, on my personal, encrypted drive. The real presentation was ready. The fail-safe version. It contained everything. The flowchart of financial embezzlement, the Delaware trust documents, the log of her IP address, creating the shell company, the doctor's report on my injuries, the maintenance logs for the elevator, the keycard data proving we were alone, and the final, critical file, which I had just received from the building's head of security after filing a formal request linked to the IT preservation ticket. A 30-second WAV file from Elevator 17, impact triggered at 1944. It was raw, unedited, and contained the distinct sound of a sharp, metallic impact, followed by the muffled thud of a body hitting the wall. And then, her voice, low and venomous, hissing a single, damning sentence. Everything was ready. The decoy was on the server. The truth was on my drive. The king was on the board, and checkmate was only one move away. In the cold, calculated world I had built around my pain. The first crack of light came not from a grand revelation, but from a quiet email notification. It was from the Stone Lake Hospital patient portal, a system designed for bureaucratic efficiency, but the message itself was an act of profound human kindness. It was from Linda, the ER nurse. The subject line was simply, "Your record." Attached was a password-protected PDF. I opened it, and the photographs from that night filled my screen, clinical and brutal. She had done exactly what she'd promised, compiling them into a formal, time-stamped document, a sterile presentation of a violent act. It was evidence, yes, but it felt like something more, a stranger's validation, a quiet statement that what happened to me was real and it mattered. She had seen me, and she had acted. The next piece of the puzzle came from the guts of Stonehaven Tower. I found Sal, the grizzled building engineer, in his basement workshop, the air thick with the smell of ozone and old coffee. He didn't look up when I approached. I didn't mention the intercom again. Instead, I handed him the official IT preservation ticket number. "The ticket I filed," I said. "It flagged a potential system fault in Elevator 17 around 1945 last week. I need the raw diagnostic audio from that time to rule out a mechanical issue." It was the perfect corporate lie, a request wrapped in the language of his world. He grunted, wiped his hands on a rag, and typed the number into his ancient-looking desktop. After a moment, a file browser popped up. He dragged a small WAV file onto a generic USB stick and held it out to me without a word. As I took it, his eyes met mine for the first time. "I just maintain the equipment," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What the equipment records, that's not my business." It wasn't an offer of help, but it was a deliberate transfer of information. He was a man who trusted his systems, and his systems had recorded a truth. He was giving it to me, no questions asked. The alliances began to surface in the upper echelons as well, in the quiet, carpeted hallways of power. I was waiting for an elevator on the 48th floor when June Mercer, the executive secretary to the board, came to stand beside me. June was a fixture, a woman who had been with Novacrest for 30 years. She was a silent observer in the company's most secret meetings, a living repository of its history. She never spoke out of turn. Her demeanor always a perfect blend of professional warmth and absolute discretion. The elevator doors opened. As she stepped in, she turned slightly, her voice a barely audible whisper that was lost to anyone else in the lobby. "You're not the only one who finds the accounting creative." That was all. She faced forward, her expression serene and unreadable. The words were a seismic shock. It was a confirmation from the nerve center of the company that I was not tilting at windmills. June Mercer saw it too. She had just handed me a shield. The ghosts of Mara's past transgressions began to emerge as well. I received an email from a private address, the name unfamiliar at first. It was from David Chen, the former head of the compliance department, one of the first senior managers pushed into early retirement during Mara's restructuring. A colleague must have told him that I was reviewing vendor protocols. His message was brief and laced with a dry residual bitterness. "Heard you were digging into the Northmore contracts," he wrote. "She dismantled every safeguard I put in place. This was the checklist we used to use for onboarding high-value subcontractors. They shelved it 2 years ago. Maybe you'll find some use for it." Attached was a multi-page PDF, a rigorous, detailed protocol filled with checks and balances for verifying ultimate beneficial ownership and flagging related party transactions. It was a blueprint of the very rules Mara had systematically broken. It was a weapon handed to me by a man she had already vanquished. My official inquiries continued to yield fruit, solidifying the timeline of the assault. I sent a formal request to the head of security, a stern ex-cop named Miller, asking for confirmation of the maintenance schedule for Elevator 17. I needed his official sign-off. His reply was an email chain, a dry factual report confirming that the camera feed had been taken offline for a firmware update. But he had also included the original service request ticket. The request had been logged by Mara's executive assistant, citing a CFO-level directive to prioritize system upgrades on the executive elevator bank. Miller was a man who lived by the paper trail. By providing the ticket, he was protecting his department, showing he had acted on official orders. In doing so, he had also handed me irrefutable proof that Mara's office had personally orchestrated the camera outage. Navigating the legal complexities of my own actions was a minefield. I needed guidance, but I couldn't risk exposing my plan. I found my answer in Beck Rowan, a sharp, ambitious young lawyer in our in-house counsel's office. I caught him in the company's law library, pretending to research SEC disclosure requirements. I framed my question hypothetically. "Beck, if a risk strategist, as part of a formal vendor audit, placed a litigation hold on a senior executive's emails pertaining to that vendor, would that be defensible?" He pushed his glasses up his nose, happy to show off his expertise. "Absolutely," he said. "As long as the audit's scope is clearly defined and the hold is limited to the specific subject of the audit, that's not just defensible, it's textbook. It's what the policy is designed for. It's called a limited preservation order. It's done all the time to prevent spoliation of evidence." He had no idea he was giving me the precise legal terminology to defend my most aggressive move. He was just a good lawyer explaining the rules, inadvertently confirming that I was following them to the letter. Even the people who were truly invisible in the corporate hierarchy played a part. An IT technician named Thomas, a young man who was usually seen pushing a cart of laptops around the office, was working on a network port near my desk. I struck up a conversation, asking a simple question about how the security cameras were wired. His face lit up. No one ever asked him about his actual work. He pulled a tablet from his cart and brought up a building schematic, a dense web of blue and green lines. "See," he said, tracing a line with his finger. "All the cameras on this floor run back to this one junction box in the service closet. If you wanted to kill the feed to one specific camera without logging a system-wide error, you wouldn't do it from the software. You'd just disconnect the physical wire here. It would look like a momentary, localized glitch, easy to do. If you had a key to the closet," he pointed to the schematic. "And the CFO's office is one of 3 on this floor with a master key." He thought he was just sharing a technical curiosity. He had actually explained the means and the opportunity. With each new piece of information, each whispered confirmation, each forwarded document, my failsafe folder grew. But it was no longer just a collection of data. It was becoming a testament to a quiet, unseen network of resistance. That night, I added a new, encrypted text file to the archive. It was a list of names, but not their real ones. Linda, the nurse, became Nightingale. Sal, the engineer, was Spark. June was Scribe. David was Ghost. Miller was Shield. Beck was Counsel. And Thomas was Wire. I would not allow them to be collateral damage in my war. I would protect the people who had, knowingly or not, helped me. Staring at that list of code names, a profound realization washed over me. This was never a story about a lone hero. I had sought no allies, yet they had appeared at every turn. They were not crusaders. They were simply decent people, tired of being overlooked, of watching the rules bend for the powerful. Sal was tired of his equipment being used for dark purposes. June was tired of transcribing minutes that told a false story. David was tired of seeing his life's work dismantled. They were all tired of being silenced. The raw, personal agony of my own trauma was real. The bruises on my skin a constant, throbbing reminder. But the fight was no longer just about the elevator. The pain had been the catalyst, but the cause was now much larger. This wasn't just my revenge. It was our reckoning. It was for everyone who had been deemed too practical to matter, too quiet to be heard. I was not just going to turn on the lights in that boardroom for myself. I was going to do it for all of them. The air in the 48th floor boardroom at 9 o'clock a.m. was like the inside of a vacuum-sealed jar. It was still, cold, and unnaturally clear. Through the vast plate-glass walls, the city of Northwick was a silent, sprawling model below, the morning sun glinting off 1,000 distant windows. Inside, the light was a flat, sterile white, reflecting off the polished black granite of the long table. The entire executive committee was present, along with 2 independent board members, a stoic man named Sterling and a sharp-eyed woman named Vance, whose presence signaled that this was more than a routine update. They were the arbiters, the jury. I sat at my designated place, my hands resting on the laptop in front of me, my posture a study in calm. Across the table, Mara was radiant. She wore a crimson dress that stood out like a splash of blood against the room's monochrome palette. She smiled. She laughed softly with the COO. She exuded the effortless, untouchable confidence of a queen in her court. The chairman, a silver-haired man named Arthur Hayes, cleared his throat. "All right, let's begin. Rhea, you have the floor. The Northmore Variance Review." Mara leaned forward, her PR smile firmly in place, and addressed the chairman, though her words were meant for me. "Arthur, before Rhea begins, I just want to frame this for the committee. I've seen the preliminary data. We're looking at a minor budgetary variance, a statistical hiccup. It's a testament to our tight controls that we're even discussing it. Nothing to be alarmed about." Her voice was smooth, patronizing, a velvet glove dismissing my entire purpose for being there. She was setting the stage, telling the room that what they were about to hear was trivial, the work of a diligent but strategically unimportant underling. I offered a small, deferential nod in her direction. "Thank you, Mara." I stood and walked to the lectern, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. My hands felt steady as I connected my laptop. The giant LED screen that comprised the entire front wall flickered to life, displaying the title slide. I clicked to the next one, the deliberately simple, almost amateurish bar chart she had seen on my screen the night before. I began to speak, my voice intentionally flat, the voice of Rhea the analyst. As the CFO noted, the overall variance is minor, within acceptable parameters. However, if we drill down into the Tier 3 subcontractor expenditures, we see a payment schedule anomaly for a specific vendor, Ardent Axis LLC. Their invoicing has consistently exceeded the project's burn rate forecast by approximately 15%. I droned on for 2 full minutes. Speaking of deviation models and fiscal accountability frameworks, I could feel the energy draining from the room. The COO was checking his watch. One of the VPs was scrolling through messages on his phone. Mara watched me with an expression of bored indulgence, the look of a parent waiting for a child to finish a long, pointless story. Finally, as I knew she would, she cut me off. "Rhea," she said, her voice laced with a gentle, cutting impatience. With all due respect to your thoroughness, is this really the best use of the committee's time? A 15% variance on a subcontractor? Send a memo. We have far more significant strategic issues to discuss this morning. This was the moment, the pivot. I looked at her, held her gaze, and offered another small, agreeable nod. You're right, Mara. The high-level numbers can be misleading. Perhaps it's better to move directly to the technical appendix for a clearer picture of the financial architecture. I clicked the remote. The effect was instantaneous and total. The clumsy bar chart vanished. The screen was wiped clean, replaced by a stark, elegant, and brutal flowchart. It was rendered in the company's official presentation style, a look of unassailable corporate authority. At the top, the NovaCrest Holdings logo. An arrow led from it to Northmore Data Transit. From there, a single, clear black line diverted to a box labeled Ardent Axis LLC. The room went completely silent. Even the ambient hum of the building's climate control seemed to cease. I let the image hang there for a long beat. Then, I began to speak again, but my voice had changed. The monotone of the analyst was gone, replaced by a tone of cold, clinical precision. My laser pointer cast a small, red dot on the screen. The variance isn't the issue, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. The issue is the destination. The funds allocated to Ardent Axis did not terminate there. They were systematically transferred to a parent holding company, Vega Consulting. The red dot traced the path. From Vega Consulting, 100% of the capital, totaling over $7 million to date, was settled into a single, ultimate beneficial owner. The laser pointer landed on the final box at the bottom of the chart. The name was printed in clean, sans serif font. The Kincaid Family Trust. A sharp collective intake of breath swept through the room. Sterling, the board member, leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. Mara's face had gone rigid, the PR smile frozen and grotesque, a mask of disbelief. Before she could form a word, before anyone could speak, I continued, my voice level. This creates a significant conflict of interest, a situation that can lead to intense internal disagreements when discovered. I clicked the remote again. The screen went black. The sudden darkness was disorienting, leaving only the ghostly panorama of the city outside. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. Then, from the powerful speakers embedded in the walls, came the sound. First, a sharp, ugly crack of metal hitting something solid. It was followed by a soft, sickening thud. And then, a voice, not Mara's polished, public voice. This was a low, venomous hiss, a sound of pure venom, captured with perfect clarity by the elevator's impact-triggered microphone. "Don't you tell your father?" The sound died, plunging the room back into a silence that was now thick with horror. The COO stared, his mouth agape. Ms. Vance, the other board member, looked from the blank screen to Mara with an expression of pure ice. I clicked the remote one more time. The screen lit up, displaying two documents side by side. On the left, the keycard access logs for Elevator 17. Two entries, Mara Kincaid, 1942, Rhea Collins, 1943. On the right, the building's official maintenance report, camera offline for an 11-minute window, from 1941 to 1952. The disagreement, I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the stunned room, took place during this 11-minute window, a window requested by the CFO's office, during which we were the sole occupants of the elevator. The chairman turned his head slowly toward June Mercer, the board secretary, who sat at her customary place. "June," he said, his voice strained. "The approval process for this vendor, Ardent Axis, was it standard?" June, who had been a silent fixture in this room for 3 decades, looked at the chairman. Her voice was steady, factual, and devoid of emotion. "Mr. Chairman," she said, "the standard multi-stage approval protocol, was condensed into a single-stage approval following a direct written instruction from the chief financial officer. The dam broke. "This is an outrage!" Mara's voice was a shriek. Her composure completely shattered. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a fabrication. A slanderous, manipulated attack." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She's a disgruntled, unstable employee." Before the chairman could respond, a calm voice cut through her tirade. It was Beck Rowan, the young lawyer from the internal counsel's office, who I had made sure was invited to the meeting. He stood up. "Mr. Chairman, Ms. Vance, Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice firm and professional. "I must advise the committee to pause this meeting immediately, given the nature of the documentation and audio presented. We have a legal duty to preserve the integrity of this evidence and secure all relevant materials." Mara stared at him, betrayed. The room was a chaotic tableau of shocked faces and whispered conversations. In the midst of it all, I pressed the remote one last time. The screen changed to a final, stark white slide. In the center, in large, black, simple letters, was a single sentence. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before I spoke them aloud, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the chaos. "Conflicts of interest don't hide in the dark," I said. "We just have to turn on the lights." The silence in the room was a fragile sheet of glass. Mara shattered it. Her panic, for a fleeting moment, was replaced by the predatory instinct of a cornered animal. She found what she believed was a weak point, a lifeline. Her voice, though strained, regained a measure of its imperious tone. "This is a digital lynching. All of this evidence is predicated on an illegal act. I have proof," she announced, her eyes sweeping the room, trying to reclaim her authority. "That Rhea Collins has been illegally accessing my private corporate email account for months. This is a criminal breach of security, and every piece of her so-called evidence is fruit of the poisonous tree." She nodded to her laptop, as if preparing to present her own evidence, but I didn't give her the chance. I remained at the lectern, my expression unchanged. "On the contrary, Mara," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her accusation. "All communications were accessed as part of a formally initiated vendor audit, a protocol you yourself approved." I clicked the remote. The screen changed, displaying a scanned document. It was the cover page for the Ardent Axis audit proposal, and at the bottom, a large, arrogant, damning scrawl in digital ink. The signature of Mara Kincaid. "Your signature," I stated simply, "authorizing the full scope of the audit, including the preservation and review of all related electronic communications. It was approved the Friday before last." The COO, who had been looking at Mara with suspicion, now looked at her with something approaching contempt. Her first counterattack had not only failed, it had blown up in her face. Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. The accusation of financial crime was abstract, but I had just proven her a liar in the most direct, verifiable way. She pivoted, her attack becoming uglier, more personal. "The audio, the elevator, it's a desperate fantasy. And the bruises." She gestured wildly toward me. "Look at her. She's an unstable, manipulative girl who would do anything for attention, even hurt herself to frame me." The accusation was so vile, so poisonous. It seemed to suck the remaining oxygen from the room, but I was ready for it. My expression remained a mask of detached professionalism. "My injuries were documented," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I clicked again. The screen was filled with the photographs from the Stone Lake ER. They were clinical, brutal, and time-stamped. Each purple and black contusion was displayed under the unforgiving glare of the LED wall. "This is the report from Dr. Alistair Finch, the attending physician, detailing multiple soft tissue contusions consistent with blunt force trauma. The timestamps on these photographs, taken at the hospital, are from 9:58 p.m. on the night of the incident, approximately 3 hours after the keycard logs place us alone in that elevator." I paused. The sworn statement from the triage nurse, confirming my condition upon arrival, has already been forwarded to the company's general counsel. The audio could be faked, Mara shrieked, her voice cracking. AI, deepfakes, you can do anything with technology. One cannot, however, fake a digital checksum, I replied calmly. I anticipated this objection. The original WAV file was delivered to me by the head of building engineering. Its hash value, a unique digital fingerprint, can be immediately verified against the original file stored on the security server's immutable log. That file has been sealed under the IT preservation order I filed last week. We can have a forensics team verify its authenticity within the hour. The board member, Vance, scribbled a note, her expression grim. Every escape route I presented Mara with was a brick wall. Desperate, she tried to deflect, to spread the blame. This is a conspiracy. The security staff, they're incompetent. The camera maintenance, it's a ridiculous excuse. They are responsible for this technical failure. The chairman, Arthur Hayes, looked toward the double doors of the boardroom. Mr. Miller, he called out. The head of security, who had been standing discreetly outside, stepped into the room. He was a tall, imposing man, and his presence immediately commanded attention. Mr. Miller, Hayes continued, can you speak to the camera outage in Elevator 17 last week? Miller didn't look at Mara. He addressed the chairman directly. Sir, the firmware update was performed in response to a priority service request. The request was logged at 2:15 p.m. That same afternoon. He held up a tablet. The ticket was submitted by the executive assistant to the CFO, citing a direct order from the CFO's office. Trapped, Mara's composure finally disintegrated completely. Her corporate mask fell away, revealing the raw, frantic panic beneath. She fumbled in her handbag for her phone. I'm calling my lawyer, she snarled. I'm calling security. I will not stand here and be subjected to this. But as she raised the phone, she saw that the two uniformed corporate security officers who had been standing in the hall were now positioned inside the boardroom, just in front of the doors. They weren't looking at her with menace, but with a quiet, resolute firmness. They were not her security to command. They were there at the board's request. Her call would not be going out. The realization that she was physically contained, that her power no longer extended even to the doors of this room, seemed to break something inside her. I decided it was time for the final blow. It was time to connect her motive directly to her own words. The transfer of funds from Ardent Access to the Kincaid Family Trust was often expedited, I said, my voice drawing every eye back to me. I clicked the remote. A single email appeared on the screen. It was from Mara's official account, sent to the anonymous administrator of the Ardent Access payment portal. The subject line was urgent transfer. The body was a single, chilling sentence. Please prioritize the family disbursement before the Q3 books are closed. We need the funds settled this week. The word family hung in the air, a confession written in black and white. It was the irrefutable link, the final nail. The room was utterly still. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, Ms. Vance, the independent board member, spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a judge's sentence. She was not looking at the screen. Her sharp eyes were fixed directly on Mara. Ms. Kincaid, she asked, her voice dangerously soft. What is the full, registered name of the blind trust that owns Vega Consulting? Mara just stared, her face a pale, sweat-sheened mask of ruin. She didn't answer. She couldn't. I answered for her, my voice clear and final. The ultimate beneficial owner is the Kincaid Family Trust. If the room had been silent before, it was now a vacuum. The gentle hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of the city. Everything ceased. It was a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped spinning. In that moment, Mara Kincaid was no longer the CFO. She was just a woman, stripped bare of her power and her lies, exposed in the unforgiving white light of the room she had once commanded. The chairman, Arthur Hayes, who had looked progressively older and more weary with each revelation, finally moved. He didn't use a gavel. He simply brought his fist down onto the black granite table with a single, sharp, heavy rap. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. "This meeting is adjourned," he declared, his voice a low, heavy growl. "Mara Kincaid is suspended from her duties as Chief Financial Officer, effective immediately, pending the outcome of a full special investigation to be initiated by the board. Security will escort you from the building." The two security officers moved with a practiced, dispassionate efficiency. They didn't touch Mara, but their presence on either side of her was an impassable wall. The room was a frozen tableau. Every executive and board member watching as the CFO of NovaCrest Holdings was stripped of her power in a matter of seconds. Her face, which had cycled through disbelief, rage, and panic, was now a mask of hollow shock. They guided her toward the door, her crimson dress a jarring slash of color in the muted room. As she reached the threshold, she stopped. Her entire body was trembling, but she managed to turn her head, her eyes finding mine across the expanse of the granite table. Her lips peeled back from her teeth in a silent snarl. She took a single step back toward the room, and in a voice so low it was barely a breath. A whisper of venom meant only for me. She repeated the words from the elevator, the final pathetic arrow in her quiver. "Don't you tell your father." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move from the lectern. I simply met her gaze, holding it, and replied in a voice just as quiet, a clear, cold counterpoint to her threat. "He'll know," I said. "He'll read it in the board meeting minutes." A flicker of final, absolute defeat passed through her eyes. The last thread of control she thought she had, the fiction of family, had just been severed. The security officers gently, firmly, guided her out of the room, and the heavy door swung shut with a soft, definitive click. The silence she left behind was different. It wasn't tense. It was the quiet after a storm. The chairman, Arthur Hayes, let out a long, slow breath and sank back into his chair. He looked a decade older than he had 20 minutes ago. His eyes moved from the closed door to me, still standing at the lectern. "Rhea," he said, his voice heavy with a weariness that went beyond fatigue. "This investigation will be thorough and independent, but until we can appoint an outside firm, we need someone on the inside to secure the data, to ensure nothing is compromised. The board." He glanced at Vance and Sterling, who both gave a firm, single nod. "Is appointing you acting Chief Risk Officer, effective immediately. Your first directive is to oversee the complete preservation of all evidence related to this matter." It wasn't a promotion. It was a field commission. It was a transfer of responsibility. A heavy weight I had no choice but to accept. I nodded once. I understand. There was no time for reflection. The machine had been broken, and now it had to be secured. I spent the next hour with Beck Rowan and the chairman, outlining the immediate steps. My first official act as CRO was to sign a directive, drafted by Beck, placing Mara's office, her files, and all her system access under immediate and total lockdown. My second act was personal. From my desk, before the news had even begun to properly filter through the company, I digitally filed a petition for an emergency personal protection order against Mara Kincaid. I uploaded the entire failsafe archive as supporting evidence: the ER photos, the doctor's report, the audio file, the threatening text message. The violence that had precipitated this was a separate, personal crime, and I would not allow it to be subsumed by the corporate malfeasance. The system confirmed my submission. A hearing was set for the following morning. At 10:30 a.m., the official email, drafted by the chairman's office and legal, was sent to every NovaCrest employee worldwide. The subject line was stark. Executive leadership announcement. The body was brief, brutal, and cloaked in the thinnest of corporate veils. Effective immediately, Mara Kincaid is on a temporary leave of absence. The board of directors has initiated a special audit of our vendor procurement protocols, which will be conducted by an independent outside firm. Rhea Collins has been appointed Acting Chief Risk Officer to oversee this transition. My desktop messenger application, which had been silent all morning, erupted. The internal chat rooms, the private channels, the team threads, they exploded in a supernova of speculation, rumor, and shock. 1,000 question marks bloomed across my screen. I saw my name flashing in a dozen different conversations. I did not read a single one. I right-clicked the application's icon and selected Quit. I would not participate in the spectacle. The truth was now a matter of public record. The gossip was just noise. Instead, I opened my email and began to type. My first message was to a private, encrypted address I had found for the ER nurse. Linda, it read, I wanted to thank you. You were right. Your kindness made a difference. The next was to Sal, the engineer. Sal, the diagnostic file was instrumental in identifying a critical system failure. Thank you for your help. One by one, I sent a personal, private, untraceable message to each of them. To June, the scribe, to David, the ghost, to Miller, the shield, to Beck, the counsel, to Thomas, the wire. My message to each was simple, direct, and contained no details that could ever implicate them. It was a quiet acknowledgement of a debt, a closing of a circle of trust. No one was CC'd. When I was finished, I finally leaned back in my chair. My gaze drifted to the massive LED screen at the front of the now empty boardroom, the final slide of my presentation. The one with the single sentence about turning on the lights had been replaced by the screensaver. But as the corporate logo drifted by, I noticed something in the top left corner of the screen. In the file name path displayed in small white text, C/presentations, board, be strong final. The night before, in the darkest, most uncertain hours, I had renamed the file. It wasn't a presentation. It was a command I had given to myself. Slowly, I stood up. The adrenaline that had coursed through me for the past 24 hours was beginning to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. My body ached. I walked to the glass wall and looked down at the city, at the endless flow of traffic, the tiny, anonymous people going about their lives, oblivious. For the first time in a very long time, I felt a part of it, not just an observer watching from a glass tower. I reached up and, with a deliberate, steady hand, I pulled down the collar of my blouse. The medical tape was still there, but I looked at the sliver of skin just above it. The angry, violent purple of the bruise was gone. In its place, the edges were beginning to fade into a sickly yellowish green. It was the color of healing, the color of an old wound, no longer fresh. I let out a long, slow breath, a sigh that felt like it came from the very depths of my soul. It was a release of pressure that had been building for years, a final exhalation of pain, fear, and rage. The battle was over, the war was won, but there was no elation, no triumphant surge of joy. There was only a quiet, stark, and profound sense of finality. Revenge, I realized, doesn't end with a bang. It ends with the quiet, simple moment when the truth is finally strong enough to stand on its own. The wind in the Stonehaven Tower parking garage was a different kind of cold. It wasn't the sterile, refrigerated air of the 48th floor, but a raw, gusting cold that smelled of concrete dust and exhaust fumes. It whipped around the massive concrete pillars, a lonely, desolate sound. I stood by my car, the key fob feeling heavy and foreign in my hand. The wind caught the edge of the medical tape on my neck, a sharp, stinging sensation against my bruised skin. It was a physical reminder that the events of the morning, of the last week, were not just a series of documents and digital files. They had a price, paid in flesh and bone. The concrete expanse of the garage was almost empty, a silent, gray landscape that felt like the bottom of an ocean. The pressure of the last few hours, the last few years, seemed to echo in the vast, empty space. I wasn't euphoric, I wasn't relieved, I was just still. The storm had passed, and I was the only thing left standing on the shore. My phone, which I had turned back on, buzzed in my hand. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was from before I even read the message. It was Linda, the ER nurse. The message was short, a simple sentence that carried more weight than all the corporate pronouncements of the day. "You did the right thing." I stared at the words for a long time. It was an absolution I hadn't known I needed, a confirmation from a stranger who had seen the raw, unedited beginning of this story. She had no stake in Nova Crest, no knowledge of the millions of dollars or the corporate intrigue. She had only seen a woman in pain, and she had offered a simple, human kindness. I didn't know how to reply. Thank you felt inadequate. Explaining felt impossible. So I opened the emoji keyboard, found the simple, powerful image of a raised, clenched fist, and sent it. It was a gesture of solidarity, of strength, of gratitude. It was all that needed to be said. Then, with a sense of final, quiet ritual, I opened the encrypted cloud drive on my phone. I navigated through the layers of security to the folder that had been the center of my universe for years. The name on the screen glowed back at me. Failsafe. It was my weapon, my shield, my secret, my burden. It contained the sum of Mara's greed and my quiet, relentless focus. For a moment, I just looked at it. It felt like a living thing, a coiled serpent of data that had finally struck. My finger hovered over the screen. I selected the folder, then tapped the options menu. The word delete was there, tempting, but deleting it felt wrong, like trying to erase a scar. The events had happened. The evidence was real. It couldn't just vanish. Instead, I chose rename. My fingers typed out a single word. Closed. I hit save. The folder's name changed. It was no longer a failsafe, a contingency for a future battle. It was a case file, a finished chapter, an archive of a war that was over. As if on cue, my phone began to ring. The caller ID was home. My father. My stomach tightened into a familiar, painful knot. This was the one confrontation I had not planned for, the one variable I couldn't control. I let it ring 4 times, then took a deep breath and answered. Hello? Rhea? His voice was thin, reedy, the voice of a man lost in a fog. Rhea, what's going on? My phone. People are calling. They're saying things about Mara, about the company. I leaned against the cold metal of my car door. What could I say? How could I explain the last 12 years, the last 24 hours, in a way he could understand? How could I tell him that the woman he loved had not only betrayed his company, but had also physically assaulted his daughter? The truth was a weapon too large and too brutal to be wielded in a phone call, so I gave him the only part of the truth that mattered, the only part that was truly mine to give. Dad, I said, my voice steady, my words chosen with absolute care. There was a board meeting this morning. I was asked to present my findings on a vendor contract. I was honest. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, filled with the static of his confusion and my quiet resolve. Honest? He repeated, as if the word itself was a foreign concept. Yes, I said. I just told the truth. I didn't offer any more. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I had done my duty, to the company and to myself. The fallout was no longer my responsibility. After a few more moments of painful silence, we said a quiet goodbye, and I ended the call. I got into my car and closed the door, the sound shutting out the lonely whistle of the wind. I glanced up at the rearview mirror. The face that looked back at me was pale, exhausted, the skin under my eyes bruised with fatigue, but the eyes themselves were clear, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, my hands, resting on the steering wheel, were perfectly still. The tremor that had been my constant companion for years, the physical manifestation of a life spent in a state of high alert, was gone. I reached into my bag and pulled out my Nova Crest Holdings employee ID badge. I stared at the picture, at the younger, more hopeful version of myself. I took a plain manila envelope from my glove compartment, slid the badge inside, and sealed the flap. With a black marker, I wrote 2 words on the front of the envelope. Evidence delivered. I would drop it in a courier box on my way home. It was another closing of a door, another severing of a tie. Just as I was about to put the phone away, it vibrated one last time. It was an email. The sender was Arthur Hayes, the chairman of the board. The subject was, "Thank you." I opened it. The message was brief. "Ria," it read, "on behalf of the board, I want to thank you for your integrity and fortitude under extreme pressure. We have a long road ahead, but today you reminded us what this company is supposed to stand for." I read the words. Integrity under pressure. It was the corporate world's highest praise, a validation from the very top of the tower. A week ago, it would have been everything I ever wanted. Today, it felt like an echo from a distant country. I didn't reply. I simply held down the power button on the side of my phone and watched as the screen went black. I put the phone in the glove compartment and closed it. I put the key in the ignition and turned. The engine came to life with a quiet, powerful hum. As I pulled out of the parking space, I turned toward the exit ramp, and the brilliant, white afternoon sunlight flooded the car. It was so bright it made me squint. A sudden, shocking clarity after the dim, artificial world of the office and the gray gloom of the garage. It felt like a confirmation, a sign that there was still a world outside those glass walls, a world that wasn't built on lies and ambition. My last thought as I drove up the ramp and into the light was of the elevator. I saw it in my mind's eye. The brushed steel walls, the silent, smooth ascent, the flicker of the lights, and I saw the doors. I saw them closing. A final, definitive seal. In my memory, that door would always be closing, sealing away that moment, that person, that part of my life. It was a door that would never, ever open again in the same way. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me. I'd love to connect with all of you. So please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from and share your thoughts on Ria's journey. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video, and for extra support, hitting that hype button helps this story get heard by so many more people. Thank you again.